us in the digital economy working group has been on meaningful digital connectivity. It is something that both India and Brazil focused on during their presidency, and for continuity, but more importantly, in recognition of the fact that you still have approximately 23% of South Africans, which translates to 13 to 15 million people, who wake up every day without access to broadband connectivity. The picture is far worse globally, where it's estimated that approximately 3 billion people wake up every day without access to broadband connectivity. And to put our collective focus into that, the other focus has been on digital public infrastructure and the strengthening of those in order to improve citizens' general interaction with their governments digitally, and also on artificial intelligence. We all recognize the impact that artificial intelligence has become so ingrained in our daily lives, both from a productivity perspective, but also in terms of great use of new technologies to open up new industries, to open up new areas for economic growth and development. But there are serious concerns around the ethical use of AI, and it is for that purpose that we have advocated for a much more protection of people's individual rights and dignity, so that enhances humanity and human rights rather than risk violating them, and also to promote the use and recognition of our diverse cultures, insofar as making sure that large language models reflect the diversity and depth of different communities in the world.
You know what's interesting about artificial intelligence, Minister Malatsi, is that it seems to be a consensus amongst the G20 nations that it has to be part of the global economy.
Yeah.
But you speak of regulation. I think we start off at home here. There was something that happened in this week where we saw a network outage that had occurred, I beg your pardon. And of course, artificial intelligence sort of apps went down in that very moment. And this, of course, opens up the opportunities for there to be gremlins within the system. How has the G20 addressed that in trying to make sure something like this does not happen?
Sure.
Because it really opens up Pandora's box where we don't want to be going into.
Yeah. Look, there are risks with any evolving new technologies, and I think the risk of manipulative generative AI is one that concerns the world. I think the world was taken aback at the instant impact and disruption that DeepSeek had, for instance, right? And it requires that we put enough guardrails and safeguard measures in place to minimize risk. You're always gonna get nefarious elements, or how to manipulate gaps. The most important thing is to have a unified approach towards standardization and towards cross-border management of flow of information, and making sure that regulations are harmonized from a regional perspective and globally.
Minister Malatsi, we've seen the declaration being adopted by the G20 nations. Nobody thought this would have happened within probably the first 3 hours of today's G20 Leaders Summit. From a minister, your portfolio, your reaction to this declaration, which has been unanimously adopted by the G20 nations.
It's a great thing. Great things are happening in South Africa.
And do you think this will now allow for there to be global South economic inclusivity? Because that is what President Ramaphosa has been touching on.
Look, a continuous mission to achieve that, not just in words, but in actual deeds and deliverability. And I think, listen, it bodes well for the future of the G20 that this G20 presidency of the South Africa also got to the adoption of the multilateralism is about, and it is a great thing, and I'm proud as a member of the South African government that during our presidency the ability to adopt a declaration was done, notwithstanding some of the headwinds that we have had to deal with.
Pleasure having you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Minister Cyril Ramaphosa, Minister of Communications, joining us here to discuss, of course, what his working group has been doing within the G20 presidency of South Africa. Do stay tuned. After the break, we'll have more for you at the G20 Leaders Summit here at Nasrec, Johannesburg.
And comprehensive and lasting peace. This summit has taken place at a crucial time as calls around the world grow louder for progress on the imperatives of our time, to end its forms and ramifications, to reduce inequality within and amongst countries, and to take urgent action to combat climate change. This year, we have recognized the growing debt burden that is faced by many developing economy countries as a major obstacle to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. The G20 has pledged to extend support to low and middle income countries as they confront debt vulnerabilities. Together, we must create a virtuous cycle of reduced debt, higher public investment, and more rapid and inclusive economic growth. When we become more successful, all of us, then the whole world becomes successful. When we began our presidency, we pledged to mobilize the G20 to strengthen disaster resilience and response. Climate-induced natural disasters spare no country. Disasters know no borders. But their toll is heaviest on those without the means to recover and to rebuild. We therefore called on G20 leaders to urge the global community to scale up post-disaster reconstruction. In this regard, South Africa introduced the high-level voluntary principles for investing in disaster risk reduction and encouraged international collaboration to strengthen investment in preventing and responding to disasters. We've made progress in mobilizing finance for a just energy transition. Climate change touches every nation, but it impacts on everyone unevenly. That is why we have together pledged to increase the quality and the quantity of climate finance to developing economies, to strengthen multilateral development banks, to support country platforms like the Just Energy Transition Partnership, and to unlock private capital. We reaffirmed our dedication to energy security, affordability and universal access, and the importance of supporting in their transition to low carbon emissions. We recognize the need for deep, rapid, and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and the need to substantially scale up investment and climate finance. During this summit, we reaffirmed our support for the G20 Critical Minerals Framework, a cooperative blueprint to ensure that critical minerals resources drive prosperity and sustainable development across the globe. Our presidency coincided with the end of the first cycle of the G20 presidencies. Following the mandate given to our presidency at the 2024 Rio de Janeiro Summit, we undertook the G20 at 20 review, drawing on the diverse perspectives of participating members and guest countries as well. It is our hope that the review will serve as a helpful guide for the G20 to ensure that it remains fit for purpose in an ever-changing world. In fact, the indicative report already says that the G20's continue as it serves a good purpose in giving guidance to the economic well-being of the world. At the heart of our presidency lies a conviction that the G20 must act boldly and act together in an environment of inclusive growth, an environment of reduced inequality, an environment which will support sustainable development. South Africa has used this presidency of Africa and the Global South firmly at the heart of the G20 agenda. Building on the developmental agenda of previous presidencies in Indonesia, in India, and Brazil, we have prioritized the issues that matter most to developing economies. And in executing our task as a G20 president, we learned a lot from what Indonesia did, what India did, and what Brazil did. So in many ways, what we see having unfolded here was based on the foundations that those three countries of the Global South put in place. The G20 South Africa Summit Leaders' Declaration is more than words. It is a commitment to concrete actions that will improve the lives of people in every part of the world. Our agreement on a declaration demonstrates the value of the G20 as a forum that can facilitate joint action on issues of shared concern. Shared concern not only for the leaders, but shared concern. More than that, it reaffirms our renewed commitment to multilateral cooperation and our recognition that our shared goals outweigh our differences. Together, we must accelerate progress towards the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations and the Pact for the Future. We have laid the foundation of solidarity. Now we must build the walls of justice and the roof of prosperity. Let us move forward together, demonstrating to the world that we do have the capacity to confront and overcome the world's challenges. Through partnerships across society and by remembering our common humanity, we can create a more secure, a more just, and a more prosperous world. And together, we can ensure that no one is left behind. I now say that this gavel of this G20 summit formally closes this summit and now moves on to the next president, which is the United States, where we shall see each other again next year. The summit is therefore closed. Thank you.
They will be because the people start.
Where's the United States?
They're not here.
And there we go. The G20 Leaders Summit in South Africa is officially closed. And yes, it's been a mammoth journey, I think, for everyone involved, from the media to, of course, government itself. And yes, there we are. This 1 year journey is completely over. Dr. Bacchus, there we go. The journey is over. I think a very similar rhetoric that was mentioned, of course, in the opening speech. What President Ramaphosa was mentioning, this inclusive economic growth, and he ended with that to say, now's the time for this push to happen. We can't be sitting there from a bystander position. It needs to act.
No.
A statement of intent, but the intent has to be done on the ground.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think also just sitting here and watching the head of states conclude, certainly a euphoric moment for us, and I think one that we need to celebrate. That, you know, in part on the global stage, but also reaffirmed the agenda of the Global South. And I think listening to President Ramaphosa talk, he reinforces that. You know, the big talk was about the US, but in some ways, you know, the US not being here has backfired. And it's reaffirmed our commitment to BRICS. I think it's even brought BRICS nations closer together and, you know, conveyed this message that we can do it without the US, despite it being such an important nation.
I want to hear some of the closing remarks that President Ramaphosa has, of course, mentioned. The meeting has called for an end to war and poverty, reduce inequality within among countries, and take urgent action to combat climate change. And I think this has been the rhetoric when it comes to this G20 Leaders Summit, and of course the declaration with regards to what is being. And I think, you know, you and I have had this discussion from yesterday up until today. There has to be a global North participation in making sure this happens.
Yeah, no, there does. I think what's particularly encouraging, besides inequality, debt, climate change, is the statement on the wars in Gaza, in Sudan, in the DRC, etc., Russia, Ukraine. And to see the G20 take that position is certainly encouraging. Of course, Argentina tried to scupple that and put a spanner in the works, which didn't hold. You know, this may not have happened if the US were present, or at least I think unlikely. I think the global north needs to come to the party. One would need to watch closely about what happens in Florida next year. It might take us a few steps back, but hopefully in the year after that in the UK, it'll start to propel us forward again.
You know, I'm just, of course, looking at the images right over there. You know, no one really knows what's going to happen in terms of, you know, his future as the president of the country, and potentially what may happen is that obviously the elective conference of the ANC is going to come in 2027, which means that he, of course, if we take the ANC constitution, needs to be done for him. But how would you, I think in the 7 years that President Ramaphosa has been the president of the Republic, how would you analyze his statesmanship, his diplomacy overall? So let's take into context, of course, we've had the Sudanese civil war. We've had, of course, you know, we had this discussion, what happened with the M23 rebels and this tension that occurred between South Africa and Rwanda. The ICJ case, which we've discussed at length too. and then the Russia-Ukraine war. And South Africa, when it comes to the ICJ case, has taken this principled stance. But then when you see the non-aligned movement in Russia and Ukraine, and of course he has had bilateral meetings with both Moscow and Kiev, how would you analyze President Ramaphosa from a diplomatic global perspective?
And movement stance comes to the fore, but when you talk about Russia, Ukraine, maybe less so. It's sort of, the optics are kind of positive neutrality. But let's come home to the DRC. I think the DRC has been particularly trying for him with the loss of a number of South African soldiers, with the proxy war, with our soldiers there and with M23. And then we faced a similar battle in the north of Mozambique. You had Rwandan forces there,
Yes.
and you had our military there. And so a kind of proxy war with Rwanda in the DRC and fighting alongside them in Mozambique. And that sort of anomaly existed, and we've pulled out now of northern Mozambique. But I think, in terms of his diplomacy, in terms of what he's achieved, that has come back to bite him. Those soldiers in the DRC. And of course we don't know this for sure, but the speculation that Ramaphosa has particular interest, or those aligned to him have particular interest in the DRC and the neighboring region. Ramaphosa is, this negotiator par excellence, but there are ruptures within the party. We'd need to wait for this elective conference. One would need to read the balance of forces in the NEC. But my gut sense is, we've had, two presidents, Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma, not making it to the customary in our post-apartheid politics.
The question of, the consistency when it comes to that. Yeah.
I think bar Mandela, we've had that sort of trajectory. I'm hoping it doesn't happen to Ramaphosa. The things that go against him is he's often criticized for perhaps consulting too much. I think we've heard that a lot, and not being decisive enough. Again, I'll come back to the point I made much earlier. That consultative culture is very indicative of having come from the internal tradition of the ANC, as it may have been more decisive. And that ability to be decisive, I think, is somewhat characteristic of that exile culture of the ANC.
I want to take what President Ramaphosa had mentioned in his speech, sustainable world. Now, obviously in the media, we like to scrutinize words, resilience, because we are at a time, Dr. Bakas, that resilience, the world's going to need how the Trumpization is going to happen, right? Number one. Number two, the rise of the far right within Europe. Nobody really knows what's going to happen there. Is the world going to need to be resilient given we've got these two extremes coming, right here?
I think while we're talking about that, we see President Erdogan walking in. So I think that's a significant moment with people gathering around him. And coming back to what you're talking about in terms of the authoritarianism, right-wing authoritarianism seems to be the order of the day, from Duterte in the Philippines to many Hungary and different parts of the world, and of course Argentina, our friend from Argentina.
Yes, Mr. Javier Milei,
extreme right wing. And I think that authoritarianism is something for us to be concerned about. That Trumpism does not continue.
I want to. Here's an important question for you, Dr. Bakas. Donald Trump. He loves the seat in the Oval Office. He's brought whichever leaders he could bring right there. He hasn't really hard stance on the far right within Israel, the Itamar Ben-Gavirs and Bezalel Smotriches. And if we were to look at it from that perspective, nobody really knows whether he's going to actually sort of model this what we are seeing within the far right of Israel. So I do think how this pans, but let's go over to the press conference with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey.
Saygıyla, sevgiyle selamlıyorum.
Distinguished members of the press, dear friends, I
G20
extend
Liderler
my heartfelt
Zirvesi'ni
greetings to you all with respect.
Güney Afrika Cumhuriyeti'nin ev sahipliğinde tamamlamış bulunuyoruz. Dayanışma, eşitlik, sürdürülebilirlik ana temasıyla düzenlenen 20. zirvenin tüm insanlık için hayırlara vesile diliyorum.
We have just concluded the G20 Leaders Summit graciously hosted by the Republic of South Africa. I hope that the 20th summit held under the main theme of solidarity, equality, sustainability will bring beneficial outcomes for all humanity.
Şahsıma, eşime ve heyetime gösterdikleri üstü kabul için Devlet Başkanı, değerli dostum Sayın Ramaphosa'ya teşekkür ediyorum.
I would like to express my gratitude to the President and my dear friend, Mr. Ramaphosa, for the warm welcome extended to me, delegation.
G20 zirvesinin ilk defa Afrika'da tertiplenmesinden ayrıca memnuniyet duyuyoruz.
We are particularly pleased that the G20 Summit has been convened in Africa for the first time.
Öncelikle bir hususu
Let me begin with an observation.
Zengin, kültürel, dini, etnik, sosyal dokusuyla gökkuşağı ülkesi sıfatını ziyadesiyle hak eden Güney Afrika Cumhuriyeti'ne ilk kez bundan tam 20 sene önce 2005 yılında başbakan olarak geldim.
I visited the Republic of South Africa, rightly known as the Rainbow Nation for its cultural, religious, ethnic and social fabric, for the first time exactly 20 years ago in 2005 in my capacity as Prime Minister.
Akabinde 2011 senesinde yine başbakan, 2018 yılında ise BRICS zirvesi münasebetiyle Cumhurbaşkanı olarak bu güzel ülkeyi ziyaret etme fırsatı buldum.
I to visit this beautiful country again in 2011 as Prime Minister and in 2018 as President on the occasion of the BRICS Summit.
Her ziyaretimde Güney Afrika'dan gerçekten güzel anılarla ayrıldım.
And each of these visits left me with truly fond memories.
Afrikalı dostlarımızın misafirperverliği, sıcaklığı, samimiyeti beni her zaman etkiledi. Gönül dünyamda silinmez izler bıraktı.
The hospitality, warmth and sincerity of our South African friends have always impressed me and left an unforgettable mark on my heart.
Ülkemizde de farklı vesilelerle Güney Afrikalı dostlarımızı misafir ettik.
We in turn have hosted our South African friends in Turkey, in our country, on various occasions.
Dostlarımız sayesinde münasebetlerimizde 20 yıl önce hayal dahi edilemeyen yerlere geldik.
Thanks to our joint efforts, our relations have reached levels that could not have been imagined 20 years ago.
Son olarak Devlet Başkan Yardımcısı Sayın Maşat ile ülkemizdeydi.
And most recently, Deputy President Mashatile was in our country.
Güney Afrika Cumhuriyeti ile hem hükümetler düzeyinde hem de ANC ile AK Partimiz arasında artan diyalog ve temasları önemsiyoruz.
We attach great importance to the growing dialogue and engagement between our governments as well as between the ANC and our AK Party.
Türkiye olarak önümüzdeki dönemde de bu ivmeyi güçlendirerek devam ettirmek.
Turkey is determined to strengthen this positive momentum in the coming period.
Şurası bir gerçek ki Güney Afrika Cumhuriyeti'nin Sayın Nelson Mandela liderliğinde ırkçı apartheid rejimine karşı zaferi tüm dünyada adalet ve eşitlik arayışının en güçlü sembollerinden biri olmuştur.
It is an undeniable fact that the victory of the Republic of South Africa under the leadership of Nelson Mandela over the apartheid regime has become one of the strongest symbols of the global quest for justice.
Güney Afrika'nın Filistin davasına yıllardır verdiği ilkeli ve sarsılmaz desteği bu bakımdan çok kıymetli buluyorum.
And in this context, I greatly value South Africa's principled and unwavering support for the Palestinian cause over the years.
Özellikle çoğu çocuk, kadın ve sivil 70 bin Filistinlinin şehit edildiği Gazze soykırımında Güney Afrika örnek bir duruş sergiledi.
In particular, during the genocide in Gaza, where 70,000 Palestinians, most of them children, women and civilians were massacred, South Africa displayed exemplary resolve.
Tüm dünyanın gözleri önünde Gazze'de insanlığa karşı suç işlenirken tıpkı Türk milleti gibi Güney Afrikalı dostlarımız da vahşete sırtını dönmedi.
As crimes against humanity were committed in Gaza before the eyes of the world, our South African friends, like the Turkish people, did not turn their backs on this brutality.
Uluslararası Adalet Divanı'nda İsrail aleyhine açtıkları soykırım davasıyla yürekli bir tavır takınan Güney Afrika devletini, toplumunu, yöneticilerini tebrik ediyor, ülkem ve milletim adına saygıyla selamlıyorum.
I commend the South African state, its people, and its leaders who courageously filed a genocide case at the International Court of Justice, and I salute them on behalf of my nation, my people.
Türkiye olarak biz de kimseden çekinmeden Filistin davasına çok güçlü biçimde sahip çıktık. Her platformda Gazze'li mazlumların hak ve hukukunu cesaretle savunduk.
Turkey too has fearlessly stood by the Palestinian cause, defending the rights of the oppressed people of Gaza at every platform.
103 bin tonu aşan insani yardımlarımızla Gazze'li kardeşlerimizin yanında olduk.
With over 103,000 tons of humanitarian assistance, we have supported our Palestinian brothers and sisters.
Şimdi bildiğiniz gibi bizim de katkılarımızla bir ateşkes sağlandı.
As you know, a ceasefire has now been achieved also with our contributions among others.
Biz çatışma ortamına tekrar dönülmemesi için üzerimize ne düşüyorsa yapıyoruz.
We spare no effort to prevent a return to conflict again.
Gazze'de yaşanan yıkımın neticelerinin mümkün mertebe hafifletilmesinin küresel bir vurguladım. İnsani yardımlar ve yeniden imara destek istedim.
And during our summit, I emphasized that mitigating the consequences of the destruction in Gaza is a global responsibility, and I called for humanitarian aid and support for reconstruction.
Tabii bu noktada sağlanan ateşkesin devamını temin ederken kalıcı çözüm için iki devletli formülün hayata geçirilmesi büyük önem arz ediyor.
Of course, while ensuring the continuation of the ceasefire, it is of paramount importance to implement the two-state lasting settlement.
1967 sınırları temelinde başkenti Doğu Kudüs olan özgür bir Filistin devleti kurulmadan küresel barış tam manasıyla sağlanamaz.
A free state of Palestine based on the 1967 Jerusalem as its capital is essential to achieve true global peace.
Mazlum Filistin halkı ile birlikte tüm bölgemizin ve insanlığın barışı, huzuru, güvenliği için bu konudaki ilkeli tutumumuzu muhafaza edeceğiz.
We will continue to uphold our principled stance for the peace, stability and security of both the oppressed Palestinian people and our entire region and humanity.
Değerli basın mensupları, Bu yılda G20 faaliyetlerine aktif olarak iştirak ettik. Uluslararası gündeme değerli basın mensupları, bu yılda G20
Distinguished members of the
aktif
press,
olarak
as has been the case, this year we actively participated in G20 activities and continued contributing to the international agenda.
zirve kapsamında ülkemizin iklim değişikliğiyle mücadele, yeşil dönüşüm, sürdürülebilir kalkınma ve teknolojik ilerlemelerin kalkınma politikalarına etkisine dair görüşlerimizi aktardım.
In my interventions during the summit, I conveyed our views on climate change, the green transition, sustainable development, and the impact of technological progress on development policies.
Bilhassa en az gelişmiş ülkelerin Birleşmiş Milletler 2030 sürdürülebilir kalkınma hedeflerinde geri kalmama ihtiyaç duydukları mali desteğin teminine dikkat çektik.
We particularly highlighted the urgent need to mobilize financial support required by the least developed countries so that they are not left behind in achieving the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals.
Zirve vesilesiyle ayrıca G20'nin bugüne kadarki çalışmalarının bir muhasebesini yaptık.
The summit also allowed us to assess the progress made by the G20 so far.
Katılımcı diğer liderlerle ikili görüşmeler gerçekleştirdik. Önemli konularda istişarelerde bulunduk.
I also held bilateral meetings with the other participating leaders and exchanged our views on issues of global concern.
Bu çerçevede dün ve bugün aralarında Avustralya, Kanada, Angola, Etiyopya, Fransa, Malezya, İtalya ve Singapur devlet ve hükümet başkanlarının olduğu birçok liderin yanı sıra Birleşmiş Milletler Genel Sekreteri ve Avrupa Birliği Komisyon Başkanı ve bazı uluslararası kuruluş temsilcileriyle görüşmelerimiz oldu.
In this context, over the past 2 days, I met with many leaders, including those of Australia, Canada, Angola, Ethiopia, France, Brazil, Malaysia, Italy, Singapore, as well as the United Nations Secretary, the President of the European Commission. And also I met with representatives of other international organizations.
Değerli basın mensupları, G20 birçok farklı ülkeyi bünyesinde barındıran ve temsil niteliği yüksek bir platform olmayı sürdürüyor.
Dear members of the press, the G20 continues to be a platform of broad representation, bringing together many diverse nations.
Ben de 2008 yılından bu yana G20 zirvelerine bizzat katılıyorum.
I have been personally participating in G20 Summit.
G20'nin mevcut ve müstakbel küresel sınamalara karşı uluslararası topluma liderlik etmesi bizler için mühimdir.
It is crucial that the G20 provides leadership to the international community in addressing current and future global challenges.
Bu yılki zirvemizde de kimseyi geride bırakmama şiarının uluslararası toplumun pusulası olması gerektiğini bir kez daha vurguladık.
At this year's summit, we reiterated that the principle of leaving no one behind must serve as the compass of the international.
Kimsenin geride bırakılmadığı, daha kapsayıcı ve dayanıklı bir küresel ekonomi inşa edilmesi gerekliliğini dile getirdik.
We underscored the need to build a more inclusive and resilient global economy in which no one is left behind.
Uluslararası işbirliğinin ve çok taraflılığın önemini vurguladık.
We stressed the importance of international cooperation and multilateralism.
Bu yıl ayrıca Meksika, Endonezya, Kore Cumhuriyeti ve Avustralya ile birlikte kurduğumuz MİKTA'nın 12. kuruluş yıl dönümünü idrak ediyoruz.
The 12th anniversary of MIKTA Group, which we established together with Mexico, Indonesia, the Republic of Korea and Australia.
Zirve vesilesiyle MİKTA liderleri olarak dönem başkanı Kore Cumhuriyeti'nin ev sahipliğinde bir araya geldik. Açıklaması yayımladık.
On the margins of the summit, the MIKTA leaders convened under the chairmanship of the Republic of Korea and issued a joint press statement.
Basın açıklamasında çok taraflılığa bağlılığımızı yeniden teyit ettik.
And in that statement, we reaffirmed our commitment to multilateralism.
Hepsi aynı zamanda G20 üyesi olan MİKTA ülkeleriyle işbirliğimizi önümüzdeki dönemde daha da güçlendireceğiz.
We will further strengthen our cooperation with our MIKTA partners, all of whom are also G20 members, in the forthcoming period.
G20 Johannesburg zirvesi süresince gerçekleştirdiğimiz istişarelerin küresel ekonomik ve siyasi istikrar için hayırlı sonuçlara kapı aralamasını temenni ediyorum.
I hope that the consultations we held throughout the G20 Johannesburg Summit will pave the way for positive outcomes for global economic and political stability.
G20 dönem başkanlığını 1 Aralık 2025 tarihinden itibaren devralacak olan Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'ne şimdiden başarılar diliyorum.
Taking this opportunity, I also wish the success to the United States of America, which will assume the G20 presidency as of the 1st of December 2025.
Sizleri bir kez daha sevgiyle, saygıyla selamlıyorum. Teşekkür ediyorum. Kalın sağlıcakla.
Once again, I greet you all with respect and thank you very much.
After Russia, and maybe this is G20 can be better relationships with Turkey and Russia. And what can you say now, Putin?
Teşekkürler. G20 zirvesinden hemen sonra Rusya ile ilgili ne söyleyebilirsiniz? Türkiye-Rusya ilişkilerinden dolayı G20 ve Rusya arasında daha iyi ilişkiler olabilir mi? Ve son olarak Putin ile ilgili neler söyleyebilirsiniz?
Bu hafta içerisinde Sayın Zelenski, yarın da Sayın Putin'le bir telefon görüşmem olacak. Tabii bu arada buradaki ikili görüşmelerde Rusya-Ukrayna savaşını özellikle ele aldık, değerlendirdik ve ne yapabiliriz, nasıl bir barış sağlayabiliriz? Bu konular üzerinde ısrarlı bir şekilde durduk. Temennim odur ki barışa özellikle Türkiye olarak elimizden ne geliyorsa yapacak ve bu konuda da barış için her türlü seferberliği bizler ilan ettik. İnşallah bunu başaracağız.
This week I have hosted Mr. Zelensky in Ankara. Tomorrow I'll have a phone call with Mr. Putin. Of course, during the bilateral talks, we talked about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and we have made a certain reviews. We tried there and what kind of peace we can establish, and we insisted firmly on these topics. And I really hope that Turkey will be instrumental in the way going to peace, and we have of course mobilized all efforts for that purpose.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for the briefing. Sulaiman Rawat from Radio Islam. As a leader of a Muslim country, how do you navigate having to be part of deliberations where some of your counterparts have a very pro-Zionist and even Hindutva ideology?
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz Sayın Cumhurbaşkanı açıklamanız için. Radyo İslam. gazeteciyim. Bir Müslüman lider olarak buradaki toplantılarda karşınızdaki muhatapların bazıları açıkça Ziyonist bir davranış ve tutum içindeyken onlar ile ne şekilde görüşmeler yapıyorsunuz?
Özellikle Orta Doğu'daki Gazze'deki savaşın bir soykırım olduğu açık net ortada. Siyonistlerin bu soykırımını özellikle görüştüğüm ikili liderlerle Netanyahu konusunu kendilerine ifade ediyorum ve soykırımla ilgili olarak da her şeyi açık ve net olarak Türkiye Cumhuriyeti'nin Cumhurbaşkanı olarak kendilerine ifade ediyorum. 60.000 kişinin öldürülmüş olduğu Gazze'de, Filistin'de bütün bu soykırımı görmezden gelmemiz mümkün değil. Ve bu soykırımın faili Netanyahu'dur, İsrail'dir.
Of course, it is clear and evident that a genocide is taking place in Gaza, in the Middle East. No one can deny this. And in the bilateral meetings that I've had with leaders, I've always been clear that genocide by Zionists and Netanyahu. And of course, this needs to be clearly said. And as president of Turkey, I'm always insisting on this topic. 60,000 people have been massacred in Gaza, in Palestine, and no one can turn a blind eye on this genocide. And the responsible person is Netanyahu and Israel.
Assalamu alaikum, Mr. President. Thank you so much. Nof Hijazi from Al Arabiya. There is increasing discussion today about an international summit. Turkey has expressed readiness and willingness to participate, but on the other hand, Israel has openly rejected any Turkish military presence. Today, is Turkey prepared to take part if such a force is approved, despite Israel's position? And could these arrangements lead to long-term peace in Gaza, or are we still far away from that outcome? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Çok teşekkürler. Arabiya Televizyonu. Bildiğiniz gibi bir uluslararası istikrarlaşma, askeri gücün konuşlandırılması söz konusu. Ancak İsrail buna karşı çıkıyor. Filistin'le ilgili olarak acaba bu konuda ne düşünüyorsunuz? Türkiye'nin katılımıyla ilgili olarak bu güce ne düşünüyorsunuz? Özür dilerim.
Tabii bu konuyla ilgili olarak bu bir değerlendirme konusudur. Ve bu konuya yönelik olarak bizler güvenlik güçlerimizin buradaki durumunu özellikle de Savunma Bakanlığımız olarak elden geçireceğiz ve bu değerlendirmeden sonra da nihai kararımızı vereceğiz.
Of course, this is a topic that we are currently assessing, and we'll be working closely with our Ministry of Defense to see how our security forces can be deployed. And after this review and assessment, we'll be giving our final decision.
Mr. Erdogan, just the other day, President of Finland expressed concern that multipolarity creates a world that is more vulnerable to conflicts. Do you agree with that, that multipolar world can somehow be more dangerous, as he says? Thank you so much in advance.
Thank you.
Rusya Televizyonu, Olga Hanım. Birkaç gün önce Finlandiya Cumhurbaşkanı şöyle bir ifadede bulundu. Çok taraflı dünya aslında kutuplu dünya çok daha kırılgan bir hale geliyor çatışmalar için dedi. Siz de çok kutuplu dünyanın çatışmalara yol açacağını düşünüyor musunuz?
Şu anda çok kutuplu dünya ne yazık ki zaten çatışmaların bizzat içinde. Artık 4 yıl oldu. Ve bu 4 yıllık süreç içerisinde yüz binler öldü. Rusya tarafından büyük oranda ölenler var. Ukrayna tarafından büyük oranda ölenler var. Ve bizler bu gelişmelere gerçekten Türkiye olarak üzülerek bakıyor ve bir an önce de bu iş nasıl sona erer, bir an önce nasıl barışı yakalarız, bunun hesabı içerisindeyiz, bunun gayreti içerisindeyiz.
Well, we are currently living in this world. It's been 4 years already that this conflict is ongoing. Hundreds of casualties are there in Russia. 100,000 casualties in Russia and in Ukraine. Of course, Turkey is very much saddened to see this situation, and we are out of conflict, and we want to bring peace, and we are engaging all sorts of efforts.
Cyril Ramaphosa from the TASS News Agency, Russia. Following up with the Ukraine question, you speak with a lot of leading. What is your feeling? How close we are to the peace deal between Russia and Ukraine? And did you participate in deliberation by America of the plan? And in which country, in what town could be such a negotiations, direct negotiation between Russia and Ukraine?
Thank you.
Rusya'dan basın mensubu. Ukrayna konusuyla ilgili buradaki görüşmelerinizde liderlerle bir araya geldiğinizde konuştuğunuzu söylüyorsunuz. Ukrayna konusunu liderlerle her fırsatta ele alıyorsunuz. Sorum şu, Rusya ve Ukrayna arasında barışın tesis edilmesi sizce ne kadar yakın? Yani yakın zamanda tesis edilmesi ihtimali var mı? İkincisi, Amerika planının görüşülmesi ile ilgili acaba bu planın görüşülmesi ihtimali nedir ve hangi şehirde olabilir? Yani Rusya, Ukrayna ve taraflar hangi şehirde bir toplantıda bir araya gelebilir?
Her şeyden önce Zelenski ile geçen hafta Ankara'da bir görüşme yaptığımı söyledim. Yarın da yine telefonla Sayın Putin'le bir görüşmemiz olacak. Ve bu görüşmelerden sonra bizim malum bir tahıl koridoru gayretimiz vardı. Bu tahıl koridoru gayretimiz bizim aslında barışa giden yolu açmak içindi. Gerek Avrupa, gerek Afrika, bütün buralara biz tahıl koridoruyla ulaşalım istedik. Ne yazık ki belli bir yere kadar bu işi başardık ama daha sonra bu devam etmedi. Şimdi yarın yapacağımız görüşmelerde Sayın Putin'den bunu yine rica edeceğim. Bu süreci başlatabilirse hayırlı olur diye düşünüyorum. Yine bu kadar insan tabii öldü. Bu ölümleri durdurabilmek için ne gibi adımlar atarız? Bunları kendisiyle müzakere edeceğim. Ve bu müzakereden sonra da alacağımız neticeyi gerek Avrupalı, gerek Sayın Trump, gerek diğer dostlarla görüşme fırsatını bulacağımı düşünüyorum. Ve bu vesileyle sizlere de tekrar teşekkür ediyorum.
As I have mentioned before, last week I have met with Mr. Zelensky in Ankara, and tomorrow I will have a phone conversation with Mr. Putin. And after these talks and deliberations, I will be hoping to revitalize the talks around the corridor of cereal or legumes, if I may call it that. And because we were working very hard on this to establish this corridor, we thought that this would pave the way to peace, combining Europe and Africa and all these boundaries around a corridor of grain, corridor of grain. I am corrected, I will correct myself. And we have actually covered some distance too, but somehow it has been disrupted, this process. So when I'm talking to Mr. Putin tomorrow, I will ask him to reconsider, to restart this process. Because I believe that this will be beneficial. Too many deaths have already happened, and to prevent more deaths, I think we need to take steps, and we have to discuss what kind of steps we can take together. This is what I will talk about, and whatever the result of these deliberations will be, I will then share with my European colleagues, leaders, counterparts, and our friends in this process. And I thank you for actually bringing this up. Thank you for that question.
Mr. President, good afternoon. Shamila Fisher from Heart FM News. South Africa is Turkey's largest trade and investment partner in sub-Saharan Africa. There have been calls for stronger trade and investment interaction between the two countries. Has this summit allowed for further talks to take place in order to do so? Thank you.
Güney Afrika basınından. Güney Afrika, Sahara Altı Afrika'da Türkiye'nin en büyük ticaret ve yatırım ortağı. Bu böyle olmasına rağmen bu zirvede aslında Güney Afrika ile Türkiye arasında ticari ilişkilerin, yatırım ilişkilerinin daha da arttırılmasıyla ilgili çağrılarda bulunuldu. Sizce bu zirve ona da vesile olacak mı?
Şüphesiz zaten ikili ilişkilerimiz iyi bir seviyede. Bundan sonraki süreçte özellikle savunma sanayinden tutunuz, enerjiye varıncaya kadar bu alanlarda müşterek birçok adımları atacağımıza inanıyorum.
Undoubtedly, the bilateral relations are at a very good level right now. And I think from this point and onwards, starting with the defense industry all the way to energy, in many different fields, we will take joint steps to work together and to strengthen this relationship.
Sayın Cumhurbaşkanı, ben amirliklerinde çalışan Filistinli bir gazeteciyim. Şu an Gazze'de ateşkes anlaşmasının ikinci aşamasından Türkiye nasıl bir rol üstlenecek?
Şu an itibariyle tabii ilgili birimleri, özellikle devlet başkanlarıyla arkadaşlarımızın ilişkileri devam ediyor. Ve barışı nasıl temin ederiz ve kısa süreli bir ateşkesten ziyade biz kalıcı bir ateşkesi nasıl temin ederiz? Bunun gayreti içerisindeyiz.
The question is about the second phase of the ceasefire and what kind of a role Turkey will play during this phase. The answer of Mr. President is as follows. The relevant groups, parties, continue to negotiate with the heads of states. This will continue because what we aim to establish in the area is not a short-term ceasefire, but an enduring ceasefire and peace.
Son.
Last question.
Efendim, A Haber televizyon kanalından Hatice Kübra Bal. Siz de ifade ettiniz. Geçtiğimiz günlerde Ukrayna Devlet Başkanı Zelenski'yi kabul ettiniz Ankara'da. Ayağınızın tozuyla da Afrika'ya geldiniz aslında ve dünyanın neresinde bir savaş, bir çatışma, bir gerilim varsa oraya barış götürmek için var gücünüzle çalışıyorsunuz. Buna bizler de şahidiz. Rusya-Ukrayna savaşında olsun, sağlanmasında olsun, yine Libya'da olsun ve dünya liderlerinin gözü de üzerinizde elbette bu noktada. Ancak bulunduğumuz coğrafyada işler yolunda gitmiyor. Sudan'da bir katliam söz konusu. Türkiye bu noktada nasıl bir girişimde bulunacak?
Sudan'ı söylediniz. Nerede bir sıkıntı varsa biz tabii ki orada olacağız. Siyasetin en önemli yanı bu. Sudan'daki kardeşlerimiz de Türkiye'nin oradaki bu sıkıntılar yer almasını zaten onlar da talep ediyor. Ve biz de oralarda barış için bulunmanın gayreti içerisinde oluyoruz. Gerek Körfez'de, gerek Sudan'da, aynı şekilde Somali'de Bu gayretlerin içerisinde olduk. Bundan sonra da yine barış için her yere koşturacağız.
The question was about the massacre also in Sudan and how Turkey will be involved in helping in the area as well, since Mr. President is well known in the world for easing tension and dealing with conflicts and wars and establishing peace, trying to help establish peace, I should say. And the President's answer is, since you have mentioned Sudan, here is what I should say. Wherever there's a conflict or a problem, we will be, because this is the most important aspect of politics. And furthermore, our Sudanian brothers and sisters, they also want Turkey to be involved in the peace establishing process in these negotiations. So wherever it may be, in the Gulf, in Sudan, in Somalia, wherever there is need to show more effort in order to establish peace, we will be there and we will continue to run and we will continue to work for it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
No, we have to go.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back after that brief media session with our visitor, head of state in Turkey, mashallah, and getting there quite a bit of questions in from, our international delegate media as well. But Firdaz will wrap up, inshallah, with our in-studio lead analyst, Dr. Bakas. I had to just pick his brain just about a few more things on a lighter note when it comes to G20. Assalamu alaikum. I know you've got a different presenter here now, but from a lighter note, I think let's sort of understand the network that takes place, the casual conversations one has at summits like this. It's not all, suits and ties. Let's talk about that. Any networking, that happened on your side. There was some international media, any other conversations that happened here with you?
Great to be having this light-hearted conversation at the end. I'm not sure how good I am at it, but
we'll try.
Yeah, lots of journalists from around the world. I had an interesting conversation with a Dane, with a Finnish guy over interesting, and their views about South Africa. So one of the first things he said was, when I was told the conference is in Johannesburg, I was worried about my safety. And I was worried about whether I'd get mugged, because that's the narrative back home. And he said, while I was here, I lived, I'm at a hotel in Rosebank, and it seems really safe. And then we had this conversation about, different parts of Johannesburg and what it could be like in any part of the world. And it was really great to have, I think, many of the other journalists, Turks, Indonesians. There's a sense of solidarity too. And for me, what was interesting was that Gaza becomes a point of solidarity. We hear, and there's a pride with which people speak about South Africa. South Africa exerted its moral high ground in terms of Gaza, etc. So that was one. The other is meeting South African correspondents who are based abroad, people like Sherman Briceby, Simon Marks, etc. And of course the heads of state we were not able to meet, but people who work at the different embassies, people who were talking a lot about this Global South initiative. So, and the rallying point was the arrogance of the US in not being here.
Did that come up in conversation?
Yes. People were talking about that, and I'm talking about global north countries, right? Even someone from the UK saying that this is an insult, this is not how one should behave, especially to a host country, and the US is not the head of the G20. In fact we are, right? And they are a participating nation. So those sorts of things were interesting.
Yeah.
very unique, and I think when you go behind the scenes and you talk to people, like I was speaking at a Russian correspondent as well, and it's not necessarily from on your side, of course, your first port of conversation is the politics around it, but understanding that these are just people at the end of the day. They have fears, they have anxieties. So of course, I know somebody from Cape Town coming to Johannesburg and saying like, I don't like getting onto the roads here, because you feel like people are driving off. But at the end of the day, speaking to Brand SA is these are international guests. We want to welcome them, we want to make them feel at home and show them Ubuntu and the Rainbow Nation that we are and it exists within South Africa. And I think besides, meeting the different faces, rubbing shoulders with international media, we also could showcase who South Africa is through our food, through our conversations. In fact, I got an Algerian girl from a radio, and she said, I didn't even know it was Muslims in South Africa. So that was news to me.
Yeah.
It just also shows how we need to represent ourselves as well.
No, absolutely. And I also think people are struck by how hospitable South Africans are. The warmth, the greeting, this idea of Ubuntu, which I think many people learnt about while they were here.
Yeah.
And the fact that even Ubuntu makes it into the declaration, that's really fascinating. And coming in here this morning, of course there's a whole lot of protocol and security around the building and around the venue, and somehow not able to get in. And there was a Chinese journalist who struck up this almost fluent sociality and offered to drive me in because I was stuck. So those kinds of things I think are also when you're at an event like this, that there's a humanity about people. And I think in part maybe that humanity is extended more to South Africans, and I don't think we appreciate enough the respect that people have for South Africa. We had this romance of Mandela, and I think our case at the ICJ really resuscitated that.
Yes, that
and placed us, placed us on the global platform. Of course, we need to reconcile that with some of our deficits at home in terms of delivery. But I think proud moment for us as the country.
And just quickly before our next guest comes, food. We were welcomed with some beautiful traditional boboati, some lovely veggies and stuff. Yeah. What were the taste buds like? Just because of course it wasn't just for us, it was to showcase to the international crowd what we eat. There was little napkins on the table saying hi Bo, how's it, just which as well. So how well do you think we showcase that in that way without even saying anything?
Well, I think there was one huge thing that we missed. They said initially we'd have bunny chow, and it eventually didn't appear on the menu. But yesterday when I asked the waiter or the person helping out what you're serving for lunch, and with a straight face she said chicken, which I had to hide my
which you could think could be a reality.
Yes. I mean, it's very much
predominantly of South Africans eat that.
Absolutely, it's very much a part of South Africa, and her asserting that was an indication perhaps of how she felt.
Absolutely.
But I think it's good that we didn't succumb to this idea of just serving Western food. And I think it's a proud moment to be able to serve what are local foods.
Yes. Awesome. Nice talking to you on this lighter note. It's been an absolute pleasure. We didn't have quite of a sit down because I'm not really into the political analysis, but it's an interesting conversation that I've picked up with many journalists, and yourself included, you of course from your side looking at an analytical point of view, and then also our visitors here just to say hi. What do you think of South Africa? You coming back, and also that conversation with Brand SA to say we need to keep it up. We're actually one of the friendliest countries. We've been voted one of the friendliest countries in the world, in fact. So where they're coming on that we are creating some sort of genocide with the, because that's the word that was used, with the white farmers is a bit of a misnomer. So much Dr. Baggers, but definitely we'll see Dr. Baggers soon again as Firaz Patel wraps up on this day 2 of G20.
Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World. I'd like to thank Shukran to my colleague Khawa Solomon for giving me the space to go onto the stage. I tried to get a question through to Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey. But Dr. Bakas, we try. But yeah, it wasn't meant to be. But obviously, you know, our colleague Maulana Suleiman Rawat, I think very similar question that he was asking. And the question what I really wanted to ask him was, you know, it was twofold. If you want to deliberate on that, even if it's for 2 minutes, you know, one of them was that the violations of the ceasefire by Israel are quite clear. And he spoke of a two-state solution, right? But it's quite clear that when you listen to the rhetoric coming out of Netanyahu and the far right, they actually are not interested in a two-state solution, and they've gone as far ahead as, you know, calling for an ethnic cleansing of the Arab population within the West Bank. So I don't know how that's going to work us.
Yeah, I think just sitting here and watching you trying to get to the president of Turkey was interesting. I hope you would have had the chance.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Just watching him talk, I mean, he doesn't smile or laugh. He's got this really stern look.
Yeah.
And I think he let out a little smile towards the end.
Yeah.
Which for him would translate to raucous laughter, maybe, a little smile. Yeah, coming back to what you were asking, clearly a right-wing, far-right, rabid, toxic government is not going to be thinking in any way about a two-state solution. You know, this is hardcore Jewish nationalism, radical right-wing nationalism, perhaps in some ways comparable to what we see in India with the sort of Hindu nationalism. But we also have to take into account that politics is about a number of factors.
Sure.
The fact that the Saudis are engaging the US and pushing a particular step forward, that places the US on the back foot in a way, but also compromises the Israelis in terms of them wanting not to accept the idea of a two-state solution, as imperfect as it may be. So, ultimately it's the balance of forces. And it's also about this government won't be in power, like I said yesterday, forever. It's likely to implode. It's a weak coalition. So, hopefully things change.
You know what's the danger within this far right? There could be the extreme far right, and when I mean the extreme far right, that when that happens, we could be moving into a more extremist state of Nazism. And this is something that has been warned, I think, especially when you listen to the Hamas leadership. They've warned that, listen, if the far right, the radical far right come in, we may see a potential ethnic cleansing occurring, and it will be done so in such a way that the US will not be able to handle that. So, I mean, should there be fears with regards to that, Dr. Bakas?
Oh, one never knows what to expect from a government like this, right? We know the brutality of the Israeli government. We've seen it multiple times before, even over Gaza in the last decade or so. But I don't think any of us expected them to go overboard like they did. The killing of little children. Even in other major wars, we haven't seen this happen. So one never knows what can come out of a government like this. One also doesn't know what it will take for Muslim nations to respond. A little country like the Kruger National Park, surrounded, and yet we're so helpless. Of course, we know that these countries have to act in their national interests.
Yes.
But at some point, there should be, some measure of reaction from them, a cut down of the oil supply, making statements, putting pressure on other countries, and we haven't seen that. So if that occurs, I mean, that's going to be really, really worrying. The other thing to think about is this is the victim becoming the perpetrator. If you think back about the atrocities of what Jewish people had to go through, all of us need to condemn that, and that was absolutely...
I mean, 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazi regime. Yes.
I mean, that was absolutely horrific, right? But the reality here is that victim becomes the perpetrator in terms of how Mahmoud Mamdani writes about it.
Yes.
Similar to Rwanda. Right, you have the Rwandan liberation movement fighting after the genocide, and now coming to power, and now you see them saying never again. Of course, nothing comparable to what we're seeing there, but the idea is protecting, killing people, etc. And we've even seen the response of Germany, kind of taking this historical trauma. And now afraid to take a progressive position on Palestine because of that history. So one hopes that things will change, and hopes that all of what Israel has suffered in terms of its own PR campaign is going to help.
Dr. Bacchus, we are crossing over now to, I think, the finance minister's press conference that is going on, so let's cross over to that.
No qual o presidente Lula, juntamente com o presidente Ramaphosa da África do Sul, com o primeiro-ministro da Índia, Modi, discutiram temas relacionados à reforma da governança global, paz e segurança, desenvolvimento sustentável, comércio internacional, inteligência, educação, combate à fome e à pobreza, além de preparar uma agenda para próximas reuniões. O importante é destacar também a relevância do Foro IBAS. O Foro IBAS foi criado por iniciativa do Brasil no primeiro ano do mandato do presidente. Mandato em 2003, em articulação com a África do Sul e com a Índia, e é importante destacar que antecede a criação do próprio G20, integrado por líderes, como é hoje, e também a própria criação. O G20, com os líderes, foi criado em 2008. E em 2009, o BRICS, que na realidade é como se fosse o Foro IBAS ampliado, com a presença de mais membros. Ao final do a África do Sul assumiu a presidência do IBAS, que até o momento era ocupada pelo Brasil. A presidência da África do Sul será de 2026 e 2027. Bem, é importante também registrar que a realização da cúpula do G20 aqui na África do Sul coincide de uma forma muito oportuna e muito relevante com a realização da COP30 no Brasil, em Belém. Na COP30, 195 países partes da Convenção das Nações Unidas sobre a Mudança do Clima, conhecida pelo acrônimo UNFCCC, adotaram o pacote de Belém, demonstrando urgência e unidade em ações para o combate às mudanças climáticas. Foram 29 por consenso, que incluem acordos sobre temas como transição justa, financiamento para adaptação, comércio, gênero e tecnologia, renovando o compromisso coletivo com uma ação acelerada e um regime climático mais conectado à vida das pessoas. É importante também registrar que na cúpula de chefes de Estado, na cúpula de líderes de Belém, que antecedeu o início propriamente dito da COP30, o presidente Lula lançou o TFFF, na sigla em inglês, que é o Fundo de Florestas Tropicais para Sempre. Esse fundo já conta com mais de 60 endossos, representando 90% dos países de cobertura de florestas tropicais no mundo, países em desenvolvimento, além do que com cerca de 6 bilhões e meio de dólares de contribuições de uma série de países. A COP, como os senhores sabem, foi encerrada ontem, tem uma dimensão formal e uma grande dimensão política. A essência do combate à mudança do clima são, como sabem todos, as emissões de combustíveis fósseis, e mais de 70% das emissões do mundo vêm de combustíveis fósseis. Por isso, o tema é tão importante, tão relevante, e, ao mesmo tempo, também tão polêmico. O impacto das decisões da COP sobre a economia mundial são imensos, muito importantes, e as discussões que aí se iniciaram continuarão durante a presidência brasileira da COP. O Brasil só passará na próxima COP a presidência para a Austrália, e também dizer que na dimensão política da COP houve um enorme avanço liderado pelo Brasil nessa pauta de temas fósseis. Na dimensão formal e política, é importante dizer que foram destacar pelo menos 3 resultados que exigiram muita concentração e muita decisão de promover avanços. O outro é a vitória do multilateralismo climático, que vinha sendo estímulos recentes no tratamento da mudança do clima. O segundo é que se triplicou os recursos para adaptação, ajudar as populações ao mesmo tempo mais vulneráveis e menos o clima, o que é uma decisão essencial. E terceiro, de países em transição justa. Criamos o mecanismo de Belém, como realização justa. Discussão do tema do clima e ocupando essa posição de relevância até a inauguração da próxima COP, a COP 31, quando então passaremos a presidência para a Austrália. Bem, esses são os comentários iniciais. Deixo então o pódio ao presidente Lula.
Presidente, por favor.
É minha vez?
Sua vez, presidente.
Pergunta.
Vamos às perguntas?
Não, deixa só dizer uma coisa para vocês. O que é importante ter em conta é que vocês...
Welcome back to day 2 of discussing various various topics around climate change, around debt relief, and of course our political analysts in studio with us. We're having a little bit of light conversation, but there are some questions that has come in from you, the viewer. We do encourage you to continue sending them as we want G20 not just to end here, but to be a legacy for South Africans. Welcome back, Dr. Bakkers. So looking at some of the questions that has come through, how will President Ramaphosa hand over to an empty chair? It has been discussed, but just please elaborate once again, inshallah.
Yeah, so Ramaphosa's not handing over to an empty chair. And of course they've refused, or South Africa's refused to go to DC, to Washington DC, to hand it over. We now know that it's going to be held off-site and presented at a DIRCO office. And that's really symbolic and really important. I think again that South Africa asserting itself, that we won't give in to bully boy tactics. You are meant to be here. You're not going to degrade and insult us like that by expecting us to hand to an empty chair like your viewer has sent in that question. So diplomatically, I think South Africa has held its posture, has maintained its diplomatic dignity, and we're not handing over to an empty chair. Yeah.
Right, there's quite a bit of questions that come in. In the discussion, they must talk about the matters of security industry for those that are working in government institutions, to change, tender out resources or sources to resume security guard under government. I'm not too sure if you were able to make out that question, but it talks about those that work within government and security, sort of the gist of understanding that.
I'm not entirely sure what is being asked.
So in their discussion, this viewer is suggesting that they should discuss the matter of security industry, the security industry, right, for those that are working in government institutions. So maybe for a doctor, for instance, that's going to a hospital and there's a high crime rate in Tembisa or, I don't know, Hanover Park.
Yeah.
So how does government protect those individuals, for instance, and tender out resources to protect those people?
Okay, that may not have been my my complete interpretation, but let's go with that.
Okay.
I think security is a serious concern, and of course, when you have essential workers going into areas that are dangerous, and we know South Africa has some of the most dangerous areas in the world, in the Cape Flats, the kinds of drug-related crimes we see, other crimes that we see, and ambulances get hijacked, health workers are attacked. I think it's incumbent on the state to protect them. The architecture of that I don't know, but certainly that needs to happen. Maybe the other dimension of the question is how do we regulate the security sector?
Yeah.
How do you deal with the fact that you have so many security companies? Concerned that the number of people or security personnel might outweigh the official personnel in the state apparatus, in the police. And if you want me to extend that, I can, because not most South Africans, but middle-class South Africans today call the South African police when something happens.
Yes.
They call one of these private security companies. And I think politically, of course, they feel safe, they want to feel safer, etc. But in terms of the state and its obligation to protect its citizenry, there's a huge divide here. Instead of going to the state, you're going to private companies. It's also indicating to us that people are losing trust in the state, and ultimately it means that the middle classes are receding.
Yeah.
Private security, private health, private education, and this privatization is continuing in every aspect of our lives. We now have estates with restaurants and sporting clubs and schools, potentially medical care facilities. So it kind of creates very little reason to leave, and that's dangerous. The middle classes recede and people start to get angrier. Eventually people are going to explode, and poorer people are going to explode into anger. We caught a glimpse of that in 2021, and I think that's something we need to be concerned about, receding into these what we think of as safety zones is certainly not safe for us for the future.
I mean, you mentioned even the conversation you had with someone that was coming here, and at least someone at the restaurant, and he feared around crime. This fear was around crime. So just as much as we, have that concern, the international crowd also has that coming to South Africa.
Yeah, and that has a huge impact on us as a nation, right? Because one of the industries we want to grow is the tourism industry, and we had the gentleman from Brand South Africa.
Yeah.
And I think when we have, brand ambassadors and ambassadors of South Africa going out and wanting to promote South Africa, obviously this is a huge, huge stumbling block for them. And it prevents people from wanting to come to South Africa. So, and, it doesn't seem to be getting any better. The number of murders we have in South Africa is just, catastrophic. Thousands and thousands of murders per annum.
I mean, I've heard conversations around neighbors and community forums saying that why doesn't government just go into sector? But we know there could be possible corruption involved in that as well. But I mean, it is something to think about. I'm going to move to the next question. How does G20 influence international decision making?
Yeah, well, that's an important question. One is, like we've said a million times, whatever happens at the G20 is not legally binding.
Yeah.
The implementation is more or less voluntary, right? And we know from past experience, from past G20s, there are huge deficits in terms of whether or not these are implemented. Often they're not, and implemented to an extent that it's not adequate. Debt relief has been there, poverty, inequality, etc. And we know things are getting worse, if anything. How does it impact other huge crises in the world? It's linked to the declaration, but that it doesn't mean that because you had it at the G20 that it's suddenly going to have some really positive, immediate or medium-term impact. No.
Understanding the wars, there was quite a few heads of state that spoke about the wars, stopping the wars in Sudan, Ukraine, and Gaza. The question is, will they discuss stopping the wars?
Yeah, well, at least that came up in the discussions. I was also sitting back and thinking, what if the US was part of these discussions? Would maybe have been a mention of Gaza, Sudan, or the DRC? There certainly would have been a mention of Russia, Ukraine, but not the other wars. So I think it was a coming together of countries, and we said earlier that even these global north countries, have changed their position on Israel. Not to the extent we'd like, but we are seeing a change.
Yes.
In effect, rebelling against the US, and some of the statements that Trump has made about the weapons and provided to Israel, just unthinkable comments been making. But again, when it comes to Trump, that comes as no surprise. It's going to take a lot to get shocked at what Trump says. It just goes on and on.
Like it's part of his nature. Let's just shock everyone. We have to wrap up for now, Dr. Bakkes. We will do a proper handover as well as G20, comes to an end. But there are various media briefings and still talks taking place. So please do stay with us.
Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World, and yes, we are going to be wrapping up our mammoth broadcast that we have had. Just for me to get the final thoughts from Dr. Imran Buckus. Dr. Imran Buckus, historical. It was an absolute pleasure sharing the broadcast with you. Just your final thoughts as we close.
I think perhaps this is one of the biggest events that's...
World Cup?
Well, maybe, I mean, in terms of
Political,
politics
yes,
and
yes,
in terms
yeah,
of these
yeah.
fora, of course we've hosted BRICS, before, but this doesn't, that doesn't compare. This is really big. And I think we've done a really great job at showcasing South Africa, not just politically, but seeing, the beauty of South Africa. I'm not entirely sure about the beauty of Johannesburg, but it would be nice if they got to go
well,
to
Dada
Durban and
Morero
Cape
says
Town.
he will fix everything post G20.
Well, let's hope, because that's one of the things we spoke about, right?
Yes,
How do we reconcile this international success with some of our deficits at home? And wonderful, well, great to see, much of what is in the declaration, even though it might be slightly watered down language, but we did well. We got the declaration, we got it early. We've prevailed, and most powerful nation in the world. And when you think about how many other countries, including countries in the Middle East, succumb to the US so easily, succumb to countries in the global north so easily, have alliances with Israel like countries like Morocco, the United Arab Emirates, etc. And here, as much as we complain about the ANC, about our government, we've done really well. I think South Africans deserve to be proud. In many of these other countries, I don't think one can express one's Muslimness like they, especially in terms of what's happening in Europe. One can't wear one's identity boldly. And you just go around South Africa and you see how South African Muslims wear their identity very boldly, very loudly.
Yes.
And I think that's something we need to be proud of.
And I think both of you are products. Dr. Buckus, absolute pleasure having you on. It's been a real honor to share the broadcast with you. We hope to speak to you again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
That's Dr. Imran Buckus, our lead analyst for this G20 International Relations expert. And that concludes the Hilal TV broadcast. That concludes Mzansi Welcomes the World. Let me tell you something. It was a thought process that we started, actually, with discussions of G20. When it was told to us by someone in Durko in 2023 that we're going to do it, we already planted a bit of the seeds. But it was at the start, we are going to do this broadcast. We didn't know where it was going to happen, but we said we were going to do this broadcast, and alhamdulillah, we have done it. The runnings around, the requesting of guests, starting Mzansi Welcomes the World, which saw us change our set. The background team behind it, our technical team, went through so much to make this happen, and I could not have asked for a much effective but a graceful technical team. And it has culminated in today, November the 23rd, 2025. And let me start with the team. Sohail Barnes, Welcome Zwane, Simon Nyaruge Shambare, Suleiman Lawal, Opiyemi Akinlabi. They were absolutely top tier in making this happen. Let's go to our post-production team. Clinton Mhlanga, Leocadia Dlomo, Malcolm Koza. Gents, lady, you were absolutely brilliant in making this happen. I want to go then to our social media team. Ahmed Meshtawi, Tasmia Kesem, who's just joined us now, but she's done really well in making this happen. And of course, on the ground, we had Fayaz Varacha to go ahead and deliver. A special thanks to two incredible gentlemen for being our guest relations. That is Zunaid Aziz, and of course, Uncle Yusuf Suleiman for assisting and getting our guests. And then Hawa Solomon, my fellow presenter, she came on when obviously I just needed time to breathe. A massive thank you to her, to our general manager for just being the sane head, the calm that was the storm. Nontokozo Mhlongo for making this happen, for just guiding us through this journey that we have been. Our CEO, Mohammed Sidat, for playing his role from an executive level. Thank you, everybody, for what you have done. Another mention to Nasreen, and really makes all of this happen. A thank you to you, Nasreen. Most importantly, a thank you to you, the viewer, for Hilal TV, for supporting us since our inception in 2022. It has been a long journey. It has been a hard journey. It's been a journey filled with challenge. Thank you. We do this for you, the viewer. We do this to make sure that you have the content on our screen. What Hilal TV has achieved over the last 3 years is nothing short of incredible. And it's because of you, the viewer. And we do it for none other than thank you. And we hope to do more of this soon, because this is what you, the viewer, deserve. And we will do our utmost best to make sure that is possible. Keep supporting us. Keep being with us. Keep being on our journey. And I promise you, we will deliver even better content as the years go by. The G20 Leader Summit in Nasrec, Johannesburg. Thank you. Shukran. Jazakallah so much for everything. And we close off. Mzansi welcomes the world. This show, which was dedicated to G20, by saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.